in the Haight Ashbury of San Francisco. And so as I got to the end of my first year of college, I had already started letting my hair grow out. My parents had already kicked me out because they said you can't live here if you got long hair. And so I was like couch surfing. And being one of the early persons in Dallas claiming to be a hippie or wanting to be a hippie, my hair was like about like it is now. You know, it's like I was a really long-haired hippie. And there was a park called Lafayette Park.
Oh yeah.
And that was where the 5 hippies of Dallas would gather. and of course I was there, and at you know, and in this like the early summer of '67, and I said I want to go to Haight Ashbury. You know, who else wants to go? And there were about 5 kids, you know, a bunch of, you know, kids my age, nascent hippies. And
you had your own car?
I bought a '48 Dodge pickup for $75.
And this is 1960.
This would have been '67, like May of '67. And I bought this Dodge pickup, and we painted it yellow, and we put peace symbols and flowers, and there's like, I think there was about 5 of us, and we had a mattress in the back, and, you know, it was a bench seat in the front with, you know, 4-speed on the floor, wooden floorboards. It was 1948 Plymouth, you know, pickup truck. Had articulated headlights. I mean, it was just a complete piece of junk. And I paid $75 for it. And so we piled into the thing, and we set off for San Francisco, and we had like $20 between us. It's like, I look back on this and I go, what are we thinking, man? We're going to go all the way across the country,
with no
and
gas.
we've got like $30 between us, and we're a bunch of fucking 17-year-old, 18-year-old kids. Larry,
drive,
what was his last name? Larry, our good friend growing up. What was his last name? Larry. But anyway, he was with us. Anyway, we set off for California in this junky old truck. And man, I was breaking down in every other town. We had no money. So when we ran out of money, we'd make it to one town and we'd all go sell blood or plasma or whatever, panhandle, look around for Coke bottles and get enough money to make it to the next town. And we just inched our way, you know, to California, and finally the truck finally gave up the ghost in San Bernardino. It just like,
wow, at least you made it out to
I give up.
California.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I mean, we did that old $75 truck and made it. And at that point, the group completely, everybody went their separate ways. And me and Larry, he was a good friend of Cat Ricketts too.
Larry,
what was his last name?
not Parker.
No, it wasn't Parker. But he was a good friend of Rick and mine. And he was only 17 and I was 18. And anyway, all the other guys kind of took off in different directions, but because he was like a personal friend, we stuck together. And we hitchhiked into a little community. One of the kids with us, one of the young boys with us, had come from the town of Southgate, which is a little blue-collar town in the, you know, the greater Los Angeles area, and so he stayed with Larry and I, and we hitchhiked into into Southgate, and we showed up at his parents' home, and they were really pissed off. You know, like, what the fuck? Yeah, you ran off, and now you're coming. Yeah, get these fucking kids out of here. You guys get out of here. And he was like saying, you know, come to my house and we'll get you a meal and all this. We were hungry. We had no money. And so they said, fuck you, get out of here. And the guy said, well, I'm sorry. I guess I thought I was going to be able to help you, but I can't. He said, but I have a friend of a friend who's a Hell's Angel, and he has a place, and I'll connect you with him tomorrow. So Larry and I had no place to stay, no money, and we're in this little middle class, upper middle, lower middle class, blue collar enclave of Los Angeles. And Larry is so tired that he literally lays down on the sidewalk with his feet on the street. And I kept trying to wake him. I said, Larry, man, you can't do that. We have to stay awake because if the cop sees us, they're gonna snatch us. And he said, I don't care, man. I'm too tired. And so, sure enough, a cop drives up and he IDs us. And Larry is only 17. And in those days, if you were only 17, they would take you into custody and they would put you on an airplane and send you back to wherever you came from. And they would put a lien on your parents' house until you paid the plane ticket. And so they snatched him up that night. And so here I am.
You're all alone.
And I'm all by myself. And I had the prospect of this Hell's Angel the next day.
Right.
And so I hooked up with the guy, and he liked me. You know, he was older, like 10 or 15 years older than me, and he had a big old Harley and total Hell's Angel guy, but a not real nice guy, Lenny Hendrickson, and he had a little house, and he said, "Yeah, come and stay with me, and you know you can help around the house, and you know, kind of be one of my helpers." And I was kind of like he was like my mentor, and so his entire job was driving from one courthouse to another to address one legal issue after another, like parking tickets, misdemeanors of one kind or another. And so I'd accompany him. I'd sit on the back of his big chopper, and I was like his boy. You know, I was his follower. And so, and there's some status in having, a follower. I was his protege. What's the character in Don Quixote? I'm Sancho. I was his Sancho. And so I was his little supporter, and I'd go and sit in court when he'd be in court, and then we'd drive to another court. So I spent several weeks with this guy, and he was a fun guy, and I'm glad I had that experience, because it was really a great introduction to becoming a hippie, is to spend the week with a Hell's Angel. And so, anyway, my objective, even though it was really cool being with this guy, I really wanted to make it to San Francisco, San Francisco.
Haight Ashbury.
And so, after about a week, I collected like $5, and I had $5, and so I hitchhiked from there to San Francisco. And in those days, you could get rides pretty easy, and so I eventually got dropped off at the top of Haight Street and Market where they meet, and I walked all the way down. It was 2 miles all the way to actually Haight Ashbury, where the corner, and it was just amazing. And I'm all by myself. I have nothing. I don't have a backpack. I don't have anything. I don't have any money. I'm just walking into the party, and at midnight plus, they had these mercury lamps, so everything is bathed in gold. And I'm looking and seeing, and there's just people walking around laughing and having a good time. It was a party on the street, and I just started walking around, and it's not like you made friends, but everybody
was the summer of love.
You were doing the hippie thing. Everybody was like friendly and
was the
loving.
Summer of love.
And there were crash pads everywhere. There were all kinds of different places. Where are you going to sleep tonight? Well, there's a crash pad, and there are churches that opened up their gymnasiums and various other places. So there was always a place to stay. And there were places that gave out blankets and stuff. So I got a blanket eventually or something, and I spent the whole summer there. Just they had a food line in Golden Gate Park, which was at the very foot of the Haight Ashbury district, was where Golden Gate Park started, and there was a food line. The Hells Angels and the Diggers somehow had gotten together and found
What's a digger?
food, and every day, the entire summer, they had a food.
What's a digger?
Huh? the Digger, Digger. They were actually they were I think they were more like beatniks, who had become hippies, but they were like, in their 30s and 40s.
Wow.
And they had organized, getting food to all these kids, because it was just a bunch of 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 17-year-old kids. And, they provided food for us. So we had food, a place to stay, and if you wanted any extra money, you could take all, they had all these different hippie papers, like the Berkeley Barb, which was particularly, I don't know if they're still being published or not, but it was a pretty big deal at the time. And they had all these other, short term, probably only lived for like 8 months, newspapers. And so you could put down a deposit and get a handful of newspapers and go to all the tourist areas like Fisherman's Wharf and sell them. And you'd, make $3 or $4, which was big money. I mean, because you were getting your food for free, you weren't having to pay rent, and all you really need is just a little bit of cushion money. And so that, the whole summer, that's how I spent my summer, just hanging out with other hippies and, moving from one crash pad to another and eating in the Golden Gate Park. And, they had day jobs where you could go to a place where they had day jobs for you. You could go paint or move things or do manual labor. And then at the in around late August, I remember very distinctly. I was coming home from selling newspapers at Fisherman's Wharf, and I had like $3. I'd made $3, which is big money. And I'm walking down Haight Street towards the Haight Ashbury, and I see approaching me. There's several hippies. And when they came abreast of me, they pulled out knives and demanded my money. And that, and so okay, I had, what are you going to do? I'm not going to like fight off 3 guys. And so I had $3, and I gave them the $3 I had, and they went on their way. And I realized that there was nobody else there. Just it seemed like overnight
The party was over.
the place was over. The party was over. Now later I came to understand it was because school started, and all these kids, these 100,000 kids, had to go back to school. Because they were living on their parents' dollar, and they had to go back to school, or whatever the consequences might have been.
How long was your hair by the end of the summer?
What?
How long was your
About
hair?
your length.
So about down to your shoulders.
Yeah, just barely to my shoulders, enough to where I was bona fide.
So you had curly hair.
Very cool, like yours. And it wasn't as long at that point.
So what'd you do? Went back home?
Well, at that night I realized, there was nobody else there. The hippies were gone. And I realized, what am I going to do? I don't know anybody. I don't have any money. And so the only reasonable thing was to go back home, go back to Dallas. And so I didn't have any money or anything. I had an old army coat, and that was the only item I had, an army jacket. In September, or at the end of August, early September, I started hitchhiking back, and I eventually made it back to Dallas. And of course, you saw the article. I stopped over. Just the trip back to Dallas from the Haight Ashbury was quite an adventure. But I ended up getting back to Dallas eventually in September, and I was instantly famous. I was the first hippie in Dallas to come back from Haight Ashbury. I was famous. I was actually famous.
Yeah, you gave a lecture at a
I gave lectures at churches, at schools. I'm this 18-year-old punk, and I fucking thought I knew everything. and these people were, yes. And then what happened, Chris? And I remember the college professors, they just thought I was so cool. and they'd say, well, we're going to be having a party. Can you come? And all these college professors would, I was like their pet hippie.
I love it.
And I'd go to their parties, and everybody would gather around me for my wisdom. And I can remember this one pipe smoking guy said, Chris, there's something very Christ-like about you. But, and along with, kind of being a locally famous, at least
Small-time celebrity.
a small group of people, I had like a harem. I wasn't a guy that, was ever interested in having sex with a lot of different women, but there were like, all of a sudden, after being, just a regular guy in college, in high school rather, all of a sudden I had like literally dozens of girls throwing themselves at me. I mean, they were paying my rent, they were coming up with bringing me food, and all I had to do was be nice to them. I didn't even have to pretend to be their boyfriend. Just be in my presence was enough. And I had, as time went on, eventually I one of the girls I really fell in love with, Susan, you wouldn't have known her.
I remember Susan.
But I ended up falling in love with vice versa also. And